I've run a software company for 3 years. It's been profitable. We've grown every year. Now, I've also worked with over 15 different clients and we've built lots of projects, lots of applications, many of them early stage apps. And we've seen a lot of them honestly fail. We worked with a lot of startups. And so that's one of the kind of aspects of startups is most of them fail. And so as a result, obviously I've seen a lot of mistakes and I want to basically speak on some of the big mistakes that I've seen through my clients and I've been able to take lessons from them. There are 4 main mistakes that I'm actually going to go through. And basically I've seen those 10 apps fall into one of those 4 most of the time. Also, at the end of the video, I'm going to share like one key lesson that I think is valuable for other software agency owners or freelancers who work with early stage founders and are thinking about going into the MVP market. The first mistake is a lack of commitment from the team, the core team. This happened to a few of my clients, but basically what happened is the core team of whoever's building this startup gets distracted with other things. And so, one of the guys goes and does something else. There was a client of mine who literally went over to Italy to do a pasta making course while he was supposedly the co-founder and CEO of this entire company. He was trying to set up this project, but then he also wanted to go hone in on his cooking skills in Italy and do some like magical course thing. His company never went anywhere and eventually just canceled and brought the whole thing down. And so it was just a complete lack of commitment from his part and his team. The co-founders of a company cannot be doing other side things. It is my belief that fundamentally this has to be somebody's ultimate massive priority in order to really take this to fruition, because there's so much that needs to be done. You cannot be distracted with anything else. There's a small number of people who are able to do some jobs for a while and then transition to full-time roles in the company, but I still think even while you're at the job, every single other hour you have to be thinking about how you're going to make this thing work. I don't think you can really properly balance, building a company and doing something else on the side for a prolonged period of time. Building a company is this like massive undertaking and you need to focus on it. The second really common mistake that I saw, quite a few apps went under because of this, was basically they built apps that didn't really solve any problems. So they didn't sufficiently validate the idea and they just built something because they thought the world would want it. And then when they tried to sell it, nobody wanted it. Nobody wanted to pay, nobody wanted to buy, and they had a really hard time. My 2 cents on how to avoid this problem is avoid validating by asking if people would use this or not. You need to figure out what do people actually want and what do they find useful. And if you just ask people, hey, I'm building this thing, like, what do you think of it? A lot of people will give you feedback that's very positive because you're friendly, they want to be nice, and oh yeah, it's interesting, it's super cool, whatever. Ask them to put money on it. Ask them to prepay for it. Ask them to put a down payment on something. Even if it's small, give them a massive discount, whatever. If they're not putting money where their mouth is, it's because it's clearly not that useful and not that important of a problem to them. If you want to build an app, see if you can make a wait list of 300 people for that application and then go ahead and build. If 300 people have actively signed up for this wait list, it's probably because it solves something. But I think a lot of founders, they start from this magical idea that they have, but they don't go and validate this with real people. They spend their time and resources building this whole thing, and then the reality is it kind of flops. Unfortunately, whatever they've built doesn't solve a real problem. It's extraordinarily important to go and validate whatever you're building before you put loads of resources into it. Those resources can be money or time, but it's important to validate this thing properly before you put everything into it. A lot of people fail to do that. The third really common thing that I saw was basically the team fell apart, not because of lack of commitment, but because the co-founders tear each other apart. Co-founder breakup is extraordinarily common. Co-founders get mad at each other. They want to take companies in different directions, or they disagree about how something should be built or what the core functionality should be. And they kind of wear each other out. They get into arguments, they get frustrated. Essentially what happens is they start to move away from each other, but also move away from the company and the mission, and they get distracted in this frustration, and eventually the whole thing kind of unravels and falls apart. It's just really important to be careful who you go into business with, who you take on as business partners. I started this agency in part because it was something that I was able to do alone. It's a service-based business and I can fulfill the service by myself to start with, and then I can hire employees, which is exactly what I did. And I completely avoided the risk of co-founder breakup. Now, being a solo founder, there's other things that are incredibly hard too. Being a co-founder, you obviously get some support essentially for free, and you get somebody else who's really committed. But there can be lots of issues. Dealing with people is complicated. People are complicated. It's hard to guarantee success. I've seen that happen a handful of times, and it is something to be aware of. Like, it is a very commonplace thing, and it's important that you really know what are the values of the person that you're getting into business with. And the last really, really common thing was that these apps didn't realize how much marketing they'd actually need to do. They thought that they just kind of built something and put it out into the world, and then it goes well and people use it. But the reality is that marketing itself is a massive problem of its own. Telling 100 people about your application is actually surprisingly challenging. And it's not just telling 100 people about it. It's getting 100 people to actually use it and try it and give it the time of day. Most of the time, it's not an easy thing to get those first 100 users to actually try it out on purpose. Marketing is something that takes a long time and it requires constant action. It's not this like lead generation system or something that you just put in place and then magically works. It's something that you have to continue doing over time. And also because this kind of ties into the second mistake, but sometimes you go and validate something and then you find out that people maybe don't really totally want the thing. If you have marketing, you can continue to validate new ideas until you land on something that really works. And your product kind of evolves as you see what people demand. This is actually how some of the best products were built. Times, you start a company and you evolve over time depending on your consumer needs and what you're good at. It's really important to spend a lot of time on marketing. And I think a lot of tech founders, especially first-time tech founders, don't really realize that marketing is a massive business problem of its own. I know that was certainly my case because I thought, oh, I run a tech company, I'm just going to launch this service. And marketing is never the top of the list in terms of priorities. It's never urgent. It's never got a deadline. You never have a deadline for a marketing activity because it's only set internally. But that makes it very easy to skip out on. And that's one of the big mistakes that I've seen a lot of people make. And actually one that we kind of fell into. We still did a little bit, but nowhere near enough. I could have expanded way faster if I had done the right actions, but that's now what we focus on, a lot more resources. I'll end this video with a little bit of an extra bonus lesson for anybody who's running a software development agency. I learned these lessons by watching clients build early stage applications that unfortunately didn't take off. We learned some lessons of our own there and basically about building MVPs and things. Unfortunately, building MVPs, it does have demand and it's relatively easier to get clients, but it's also not the most profitable, especially when you're working with very early stage founders or first time founders, because obviously they don't have money and they don't know what they're doing. We've built a bunch of applications that don't exist anymore. Like they're not on the market, they were taken off the market. And so they don't make for great portfolio pieces, which is really unfortunate because we still did the work, we did great work, but because of the founders, they were removed from production essentially. It leaves us with a lot of kind of empty case studies that we can't really show loads for. That is a disadvantage of working in the kind of early stage market, unfortunately. So if you run any kind of development agency or are any kind of freelancer, just do beware. There is a disadvantage to doing MVPs and stuff, even though sometimes it feels like these contracts are a little bit easier to find. Now, for example, we focus a lot more on existing companies with more presence because we want to build a portfolio with a lot of longevity. It's a big focus for us too. If you've made it this far, I hope you enjoyed the video and took something from it. Feel free to ask questions in the comments. I read those. I record every day.